Want to learn how to create seamless object interactions in Unreal Engine 5? In this tutorial, we'll build an expandable object interaction system using Unreal Engine's new Contextual animation plugin. What's up guys, welcome to Timecodes Games, where we break down the secrets of game dev. For this tutorial, I'm using Unreal Engine 5.8 and the default third-person template. Before we get started, you're going to want to make sure you enable the contextual animation and motion warping plugins in your project. Okay, so in my project, I imported this storage level, and this is totally optional. I just did this for the visuals. I got this from Epic's Free for the Month giveaway. So I'll link it in the description if you want it, but I also added 3 interactable objects already to this scene. So basically everything that's orange you can interact with. So this storage container you can open and search. This lift you can pull the lever and it'll take you to the second floor. And then this door you can kick open. So we're going to be setting up the door from scratch. And all 3 are going to use the same master actor that'll all have the same logic for triggering a contextual animation scene, and that's not going to change. And this will basically work with any paired interaction as long as you have an object animation and a human animation that match the same frame lengths. So I already have that for the door, so we'll take a look at that now. But basically I have these 2 animations, so one for the door opening that I set up as a montage, and there's a lot of blank time because you kick the door first, but then right at the end you'll see it opens. And then I also have a montage for kicking the door, the human side. And I'm doing a little more setup here that I'll walk you through, because I'm not going to do it from scratch, but basically I have these camera shake notifies, and I'll walk through really quick what those are doing. This is totally optional, feel free to do this or not do this, but it's super simple. It's just an anim notify that I created. I added a boolean for whether it's a small shake or a big shake, and then I just cast to the third person character, check whether that is true or false, and then I trigger this custom event, which basically just plays a camera shake, the legacy camera shake, not even the new one. So it's super simple. If you go back to the camera shake, another thing that I did here, I just marked it as instance editable. So in my actual montage, I can set whether it's a big shake or a small shake. Really simple setup. The one that you'll have to do though is this motion warping anim state notify. So to create this, once you have motion warping enabled in your project, you just right click, add notify state, and then choose motion warping. And then it'll give you this expandable notify state that you can kind of stretch for how long you want. And what you want to do with this is if you have an animation with root motion, and if they're taking a step in whatever object interaction you have, you want to kind of have this happen during the step. And that's the other thing too, I'll say, depending on the animations you use, if they're in place, you'll notice it doesn't look great, even if you have root motion, but they're just not moving. You really want like a step or something to bring the character forward. So in this clip, they're taking this step, and that's kind of when I'm triggering the motion warping. Then the other thing that you're going to want to do in here, if you go to your root motion modifier, skew warp is fine, and then you want to set a target name, so I just made it player. And then you can leave most things the same. The other thing I did was the amount of time it takes to rotate to face the object is this like warp rotation time multiplier. So I just set this to 2, so it's a little faster to rotate. And then the only other thing I did for my montage is I also added some sounds. So on the sequence itself, I added these kick door and grunt sounds. Again, totally optional. The only one you really need is that motion warping tag in whatever human animation you have. So now the next thing we can do, we can set up our master actor for object interactions. So let's go into the content drawer, right click, do blueprint class. Just choose actor and name it BP master object interaction. Then let's double click that open. And I'm just going to right click and close other tabs. So every interactable object actor is going to need a few things in the components tab. So let's add a box collision, and then let's also add a skeletal mesh. And depending on what your object is, if it doesn't actually animate and it's just the character interacting and it's a static mesh, you can also add a static mesh, but the objects I'm interacting with are skeletal meshes, and we can just rename that to interactable object. And then the last thing that we want is the contextual anim scene actor. So with all of those added, the next thing we're going to do is go into the event graph. And first, let's add a reference to our player character. So player character, and then on begin play, we'll do this. So we'll cast to third person character, and then we'll just promote that to a reference. Then this will come into play later, but we basically want to, whenever we leave a contextual animation scene, we want to pause the animations on the object. And depending on your object setup, or if you're actually going to use an ASM with a little more complexity to it for the object animation, you might handle this a different way. But for my objects, after they move them, if you pull the lever or kick the door open, I want it to stay open. So a really easy way to do that, we can just get our contextual anim scene. We just want to kind of maintain the state at the end of the scene. So something you can do is drag off of this and get bind event to on left scene delegate. So basically when it leaves the contextual animation scene, and then we can make a custom event. I'm just going to call this pause animation. And then we want to get our interactable object, and then we're just going to do pause anims. We'll do set pause anims to true. And then we need another variable, so let's add one, and we're going to call it object interaction, or actually let's call it b object interaction complete. And then we want to set that to true at the end of this. Okay, so the next thing we can do is click on our box collision and go under events and do on component begin overlap. And we're going to set it up just so when you walk over the overlap trigger, it's going to interact with the object. But at some point you might want to add maybe an input that actually triggers the interaction once you're in this overlap box. And maybe we'll do that in a future video, but for now we're going to keep it pretty simple. So what we can do is get our object interaction complete variable and then get a branch. So when the character overlaps with this box, and actually we probably want to do a check just to make sure that it's the character, so we can do other actor equals our reference for our third person character, just so that you don't trigger this on any actor overlapping. And then the next thing that we can do is get a reference to ourself, and we can get, or sorry, not get, make contextual anim scene binding context. And then we can right click and let's get the node, create contextual anim scene bindings for two actors. So since this is the object, it's going to be the secondary actor and the primary is going to be the character. So if the object interaction is not complete, we want to trigger it. And then we want to do the same thing for the third person character. So let's get that reference, make contextual anim scene binding context just like before, and then that will be the primary. And one other thing we can do is we can drag off of scene asset and do promote to variable, just like that, because we're actually going to set that in all of the children actors. And then if we drag off of out bindings, we can do start contextual anim scene, and it automatically got our component. Although we probably want to use the contextual anim scene actor from the third person character, which does remind we have to add that. So if we search third person character, I've already added in mine. So you want to add two components here. So you want to make sure you have contextual scene anim actor, and then you also want the motion warping component as well. So as long as you have both of those added already, you can drag off your third person character and you can do contextual anim scene actor, and then you can use that as the target for starting the contextual anim scene. And then let's save, and that's actually all we need for our master actor. And then let's go back to our content drawer, and then let's right click on our master actor and do create child blueprint class, and we'll call this BP underscore door. And then if you double click door open, what we're going to want to do in here is we're actually going to want to set the interactable object to be the door. So I have my skm underscore door skeletal mesh, and again this will be whatever your interactable is. And then for mine, I want to set the collision box in front of the door. So in my animation it actually opens from this side, I believe. So I'm just going to scale up my collision box and just set it somewhere in front of the door. Okay, and I think that's everything we need in the door for now, because we will have to set our scene asset in here later, but we haven't actually created it yet. And then the next thing that we want to do, if we go back to our content drawer, we want to create a data asset for our roles. And if you watched the previous Zombie Bite tutorial, this will all be pretty familiar. Contextual animation for two human characters is very similar to the objects. There's just a few key differences. So what we're going to do is right click and then search for data asset. And then we're going to do contextual anim roles asset, do select and name it DA underscore object interaction roles. And then double click that open and then click the plus. And then we're going to add two array elements. And then the first one where it says name, we're going to name it player. And then where it says is character, we're going to check true. And then where it says capsule half height and radius, you just want to match whatever your third person character has. So for mine, it's 90 and 35. And then where it says mesh to component, where it says location and rotation, we're going to do -90 for both. And this just has to match what the character has, basically. You'll notice if you don't set this in your scene, your characters will be either like floating above the scene or rotated the wrong way. So just make sure that that's correct. And then for the second element, we're going to make this object, and then it's not going to be a character, and then everything here can stay the same. So do save on the roles. And then now what we can do is we can right click and do contextual anim scene. And we'll name this pass underscore object interaction underscore door. And if you double click that open, The first thing we can set is our roles. So we'll go to roles asset, just make sure we do our object interaction roles. And I have two because I had previously set it up, so I'll do the new one. And then for the primary role, it's going to be the player. And then we're going to want to add a new anim set to the scene. But before we do that, there's one other thing we need to do in our door that I remembered. So if we go back, we won't actually be able to play animations on the door if we don't have an animation blueprint for the door. So that's one thing we can do. So if we go back to our interactable object, and then let's find the door, and then right click on the skeletal mesh. Then we're going to go to create, and we're going to do anim blueprint, and we'll just name it ABP underscore door. And actually I already have that, so I'm just going to do underscore door 02 because I've already made one. And if we double click it open, the only thing we need in here is a default slot. So let's get our slot default and then just hook that up to the output pose. And you'll see just the way that we're triggering the animation, we need to call it from the default slot. So do compile, save, and then let's go back into our cast scene. And now we're ready to set up our anim set. So let's click new anim set. And then for the animation, we want to use our door kick for the player. And actually, sorry, we want the human version. So I think it's this one. Let's see. AM kick door. And then for movement mode, we're actually going to not set this. Keep it walking for now. We'll override this in a second. And then for the second one, let's do the AM door kick. So yeah, that's the one. That's just the object. I should rename these better, but you might want to just name one object and one player. That'll make it easier to find. Then keep everything else the same. Random weight, that's fine. Do OK. Okay, so now we have our contextual anim scene with the animations and the doors animating. Okay, so the first thing I think we'll change if we go to the override preview data, and right now it's using for our object a skeletal mesh for the type. We're going to change this to actor. And then for preview actor class, we're going to do BP underscore door, so the door we created. And then if you make sure you have the object selected, if you scroll down, it'll say selected anim track, AM door kick, and that's all correct. Then one other thing we need to do in our door actor, actually, if we go to the interactable object itself, we just want to make sure we're using the new ASM that we made. So if we click on use animation blueprint, we just want to find our door. Door 02 was the one that we made, so do compile. Then if you go back in the contextual anim scene, now the animation's actually playing on your actor, which is what we want. So if you select the player section and then you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see mesh to scene. And then I already have some values that I know works for this particular actor, so I'm going to do -50 for location X, and then -130 for Y. And then what you need to do after changing that is click reset scene. So now my player moved into a new location, and if I click play, you'll see they kick the door, and that's essentially lined up. So I think that's going to work for me. One thing I wish you didn't have to add the values and then click reset scene every time. It is a little bit of a pain. Okay, now we need to set up our warp points. So since we did that motion warping anim state notify in our montage for the kick, we need to reference that here. So what we can do, go to this active section, and where it says warp point definitions, we just click plus. And then for the warp target name, we named it player. And then for mode, we'll do custom, and then origin, we'll set it to the object. And doing it this way means we're going to warp to the object. It's not going to warp to us. If you watch the zombie tutorial, you might remember that we were kind of warping both actors towards each other at the same time. In this case, we just want the object to stay stationary and the player's going to warp to it. So these settings should be correct. Then you're going to want to click update warp points after that. Do yes. Okay, that should be everything we need in our contextual scene asset. So let's just do save, and then let's find our BP door again, and then go back to class defaults, scene asset, and just make sure we set it to use our cast object interaction door. And then one other thing we need to do in the master actor, I realize we set object interaction complete at the end of pause animation, but we actually probably want to do it at the end of playing the contextual animation scene, just so that you don't keep repeating this if you overlap this multiple times. So I kind of want to set this earlier. Then if we go back to our demonstration level and we find our BP door and drag it off into the scene, if we click play, now we should be able to walk up and our scene starts playing. Yep, we break through the door and then it doesn't re-trigger. So that's all working. Okay, then I also set up interacting with this cabinet, and this actor is set up pretty much exactly the same way as the child actor for the door. We just swapped out the door for the cabinet, and then I set up a new contextual animation scene that is the cabinet interaction. So it's the same exact process, and then if you walk up to the cabinet, you can open it up. And you'll notice they kind of warp just a little unnaturally there, but that's because this animation didn't have steps at the beginning. So you kind of want to make sure you have steps. It's really going to make your interactions look more natural. And you can kind of edit your animations so that you can add steps to them. It's pretty easy using Sequencer. Then the other interaction I added, and this one's a little more unique, is this platform. So if I walk onto the platform, they can pull the lever and then it raises up. And it's essentially the same as the other two. The only difference, if we go into this actor, is that I added this logic on begin play. This basically sets the start location of where the actor is in the world, and then it sets an end location, which I should probably promote this to a variable so you can tweak this and set it to whatever you want. But basically whatever you set this to is going to offset from the start location, and that's going to be where your platform ends up. So I'm just raising it by 270. And then I set this up in a way you guys don't have to, but I basically added a child actor for the lever. So the platform is its own actor. The child actor is our interactable object actor. And then I'm casting to that actor, and I have this event called onLeverPulled. So when the lever gets pulled, which I'm doing through an anim notify in the montage, then I trigger this custom event, and then the custom event moves the platform up, and it's just a timeline that just goes from a value of 0 to 1. And then I use that float value to lerp between my start and end location, and then I set my actor location so that it actually moves the platform. So really simple. It's a pretty basic setup. Okay, so I think that's where we're going to wrap the video. Hopefully that gives you some good ideas of how to create your own object interactions using contextual animation. Let me know if you have any questions. Make sure you like and subscribe. It really helps my channel grow. If you make any cool object interactions for your game, post them in our Discord channel. I'd love to see them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.